Angora. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Before we start, let me remind everyone that we still have plenty of headsets left for the interpreting. So if you need to have that, please pick one up at the back end of the room near the entrance. Üdvözlök mindenkit a mai rendezvényünkön.
To discuss what are the most important tasks for strengthening the social equality, social justice and democracy in Europe. There is a war going on next door before our eyes, which confirms how important this is. Szeretettel köszöntök mindenkit a mai eseményünkön. Arra kértük önöket, hogy csatlakozzanak hozzánk, és vitassuk meg együtt.
I'd like to welcome everyone. We invited you so that we have a dialogue for the social justice and democracy in Europe, and that is all the more underscored by the war situation that is unfolding in our neighborhood. Before we start with the keynote addresses and the rest of the addresses, I'd like to ask our presenters to join us, and let's have a photo.
Speech.
Dear friends, thank you so much for being here. I was really looking forward to being in Budapest. Hungary has been on the news a lot of the last years, and usually not for the good reasons. I know how hard it's been for the opposition. I have the opportunity to talk to my Hungarian colleagues, to Clara, to István, but I wanted to be here to give all my support to Hungarian, because we are in the together. When democracy and the rule of law are attacked somewhere in Europe, it is all Europeans that suffer. I would say more. Wherever a dictator breaks the law, oppresses his people, and undermines democracy, the whole world is at risk. And we are seeing that today in Ukraine. This is why the topic of this debate is so important. We need to strengthen democracy in Hungary and in Europe, because populists take advantage of inequalities and frustration. The more egalitarian we make our societies, the more opportunities we create, the more we isolate populists. I really hope that the war in Ukraine will be a turning point, not only in Europe, but especially in Hungary. Viktor Orbán has to choose to be with Europe, or has to choose to be with Putin. It's very clear. It's a clear message, and citizens in Hungary needs to know. We sent a strong message this week in the European Parliament with a strong resolution to fight, to defend our values, because Putin not only acting with the illegal occupation in Ukraine, it's not only about the territory issue, it's about the fight against the democracy. This is his goal. And for this reason, we as Europeans has to defend the freedom and the democracy. And Orban have to choose. And it's so important to send this strong message for the next weeks, because it's essential to defend our values and our democracies. But it's not only about this issue. We have to speak about other questions, about the funds, for example. No? This morning I had an interview in the Club Radio, and they asked me about what is happening in this moment with the conditionality rule of law instrument. And I was very clear. We don't want to block the money for Hungary. We want the European money for the citizens in Hungary. But the government has to present the reform plans. In this moment, we will be able to start. But the Orban government needs to decide that defend the rule of law is one of the more important conditions for us as Europeans. We want Hungary in Europe, of course, and the citizens need to know that we are working for them and we are working with them. We still have to discuss what to do with the European semester and with other things, no? And a lot will depend on what happens over the next weeks with the war in Ukraine and its economic consequences, of course. But there are other things that we can already advance. We should fight more against inequalities and poverty. For that, we need to put in place a proper anti-poverty strategy at EU level that needs to include a strengthening of the child guarantee, a reinforcement of the youth guarantee, a strong directive on a minimum wages, and for people who are left without a job or any income, the idea of an unconditional basic income or a proposal on minimum incomes. Promotion of social dialogue, of course, is another important issue for us to promote our cooperation with the trade unions. And these are all things that our Hungarian colleagues have been also calling for, and we stand united to make sure that the European Union moves in the right direction. A union that protects democracy and freedom, individual rights, and a union that protects people and creates opportunities for all. I am sure that we will have a very good exchange today with all of you, with your ideas, with your proposals. We want to hear from you, because the European project can only advance if politicians, citizens, NGOs, civil society, business, workers, and all different actors can bring all their potential. We are here together to build more inclusive, equality, and better Europe. Thanks for everything, and I hope to have a good exchange with all of you. Thanks a lot. And now, yeah, you are.
Thank you so much. Don't take my job. Szeretném megkérni Dobrev.
Thank you. Let me invite Ms. Clara Dobrev for a keynote address. Thank you very much. I am going to speak in Hungarian, but let me say a few words in English for my friends.
Sentences to all my friends in the European Parliament and in the S&D group. You are here with us. Not easy times for Hungary, and your support counts a lot. És ha most megengedik, akkor magyarul folytatom.
So if you'll allow, I am going to continue in Hungarian. When 2.5 years ago, when we set out the Future of Europe conference of the Future of Europe, we wanted to talk about important matters as to what Europe is going to look like in the 21st century. We were talking about climate change, about social equality, how to expand Europe, what the new Europe is going to be like. We were looking towards the future. It was a little bit forgetting about what happened in Europe's past. The reason we forgot is because, thank God, we were able to forget, because Europe was essentially a project of peace. What it was about is how there is never ever going to be war on this continent again. It was successful as a peace project. More than 70 years that the European Union has seen war, and never in history has ever there been a period like that. And yet, here we are at the beginning of the 21st century, in 2022, and again, we need to remind ourselves that Europe is a peace project. Everything that our founding fathers and mothers, our politician friends, everyday people fought for, is under threat again. And when I say Europe is a peace project, that also means why it was successful. Well, it was successful because there were common values, not just interests, but values. What we saw is when we struck compromise for many, many years as to how strong we need to represent those interests. When we allowed people to tread those interests in the mud, surely, if slowly, we found ourselves in a situation where Europe's interests, the European citizens' interests, are compromised. What we see now, when a politician, a prime minister, a president feels that their room to move for making decisions is narrowed down, then first they take away freedom of the press. They occupy independent media, papers, radio, TV. They have their cronies and cadres fill those positions and keep on pressing the lies 24 hours a day. Then they take away the liberties of our communities, the freedom of organizations, the freedom of the civil society and NGOs. Sometimes you see police being the enforcers for that. Then they take away the liberties of the workers. They start attacking trade unions. And then comes the freedom of thought. They attack scientists, free universities. And once all of our liberties are taken away, they come for the last thing that we have, our own liberty. Ladies and gentlemen, make no mistake. I was speaking about President Putin in the past few minutes. But I'm pretty sure we can all see that from democracy, going through illiberal democracy towards authoritarianism is a one-way street. There's no turning back. There's no a little democratic, a little illiberal. There's no little Democrats, little bit of a dictator. There is no such thing. And if the Democrats fall asleep and fail to realize in time the threat they're under, they're going to wake up in a dictatorship. Dictatorships are violent, increasingly violent, and that is the very thing we see on our eastern borders. The Conference on the Future of Europe, for that very reason, has to look to other things, not just the future, also to what we have left behind. We need to look behind us to see the foundations on which our community was built, and we also need to confirm and strengthen those. When today we are talking about rule of law and discussing that, we're also talking about the future as well as the past of Europe. And for me, very importantly, you're going to be debating the future of Hungary. When discussing ways to make this country more just, to make the European Union more just, how we will end our citizens' exposure, that's when we're going to be discussing how we will have peace in Europe. This conference has never been more pressing than today, and never been more pressing in anywhere else than in Hungary. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with those present. And I hope that very soon, in a couple of months, we are going to have a stronger Europe, a peaceful neighborhood for us to keep on thinking about the challenges we are facing. First, we need to sort things out. Thank you. Thank you. After the keynotes, let's start with our first topic. Let me note that once the presenters of the topics have spoken, the participants in the room will also have a chance to ask questions. First, social mobility and equal opportunities. And the first presenter is going to be Mr. István Újhelyi, Member of the European Parliament.
Köszönöm szépen mindannyiójuknak, hogy itt vantok.
Thank you indeed for everyone for being here. I have no choice myself but to start with the war. I mean, we wouldn't be right in our thinking if that's not the first thing we'd mention. Back in 1989, I was 14 years old. I was standing next to my father on the Hungarian-Romanian border. And as a patriot, out of love for people, I was organizing humanitarian shipments during the Romanian Revolution. Sometimes my father said goodbye. He sat into the Red Cross car and went over to Romania. And sometimes he came back with that same car, showing bullet holes. Then, about 5-6 days down the road, we heard warplanes, fighter jets flying overhead to bomb Yugoslavia. And back at that then, being a patriot and being a promoter of peace, I held speeches against that war. Since then, I'm over 45, and this is where I'm going to send the message to Mr. Orbán and his co-conspirators to stop their current policy, to stop the barrage of lies that can be attributed to no one other than themselves, to stop trying to say that it is our fault. So it's quite very clear what our fraction head Irache said. It's either Orbanistan or the European Union. This is what we can give us stability, a predictable vision for our children. But let's also discuss what kind of Europe we'd like. My colleagues are going to investigate that from several aspects. The reason I'm speaking today is because it was here in Budapest where we started a very important and essential, a revolutionary change in the context of the EU's social policy, because it was us here who articulated that we need a social healthcare union. The S&D fraction, us, the Social Democrats, were the first ones to put the first lines of that proposal before the European Parliament, that we need something to change European healthcare and social situation, that we need a common policy for that. So that is why I'm thanking the S&D fraction to have taken up on that proposal, because this started down from here in Budapest. I don't think any one of us, and not just in Hungary, many other societies, want to live in a society where you have, here in Hungary, thrice the chance, if you're a hospital patient, to die through infection at the hospital than if you were in Germany. It's also unacceptable if you look at the conditions that our doctors and nurses are working in. It's unacceptable that there isn't a set of minimum requirements, a minimal regime in the EU that would say that the same minimum standard of healthcare is something that must be provided to everyone, all 450 million European citizens. Why is it that you can work freely anywhere in the EU, that there's free flow of goods, and yet we don't have this kind of minimum? It's very important now that through the rule of law debate, we'll have the way to stake this claim. So I'd like to thank the S&D fraction for joining us in that fight. And we looked at the rest of the EP fractions and tried to contact them. And you know, hopefully this war is going to end soon. And all the more reason that is for us to keep on fighting for the social advancement of everyone in the EU, whether in Malta, Berlin, Brussels, or here in Hungary. Thank you for coming. Thank you. I'd like to invite Annette Bös, Member of Parliament in Hungary, to present next. Thank you very much. Let me welcome and greet everyone, and it's quite an honor for me to be here among our Social Democrat friends, being part of the Liberal caucus, which is a similar situation than what we have here in the Hungarian Parliament. And this is, I'm just saying that because it connects to what I wanted to talk about. Recently, we visited an event where the Social Democrats brought the French colleagues' green message, namely that the 21st century is about representing at the same time those who are afraid of the end of the world and those who are afraid of the end of the month. And that's not just a matter for Social Democrats or Liberals or Greens. This is a question of existence. The question is whether the world can stay the way it is today, or even better, whether our grandchildren will have the chance to grab a mic in a room like this and speak about their future when their children's and their grandchildren's future. And this is not really about whether you're a liberal, conservative, or green. It's much rather trying to find common ground that can be used to build for all of us. And those are the values that held together the Europe we know today. And now that we have to hold on with two hands to be able to maintain it. You hear that Euroscepticism started and strengthened in recent years because generations grew up who did not see war. And I always said, well, wouldn't it be great that you don't have to see war to turn back to European values? And yet, it's what we see in our neighborhood today. And it has once again taught the deepest dimensions of solidarity here in Hungary. The poorest people have taken action all around the country who have hardly anything. They said, okay, I'm going to take a pack of nappies or tissues or a blanket and give it to those who are fleeing from war. If you look at these people who on the EU's border need to flee because it was impossible. We had no way to do anything with peaceful means with this Russian aggressor. And this is a person who was obviously going against the direction of the one-way street. There's no more looking for balance. Balance is always fragile. We need to find harmony because that's stable, that is solid. But it can only be so if we can pay attention to each other, if we understand that the members of another society, another people, which is the exact same thing that we wish for, to live in peace, to enjoy the rights ensured by the rule of law, for everyone to have the opportunity to fight for and make their own livelihood. And it doesn't matter if you're conservative, liberal, green, or social democrat. Certainly there are some values that are more or less important for each of these party families. But if we do not learn from each other and we don't say as a liberal, yes, solidarity is indeed a value that will be definitive, not just for our present, but also whether or not the human history will have any centuries going ahead. I say, without solidarity, there are no such centuries in the future. You need to reach out and hold hands. You need to find harmony. What we see beyond the matter of what's happening over the border, what you have in the opposition here in Hungary, that kind of joining forces is perhaps a little bit more successful than what we saw before. It's important for us to join forces because we want to be gatekeepers to the West, and not those who sell off the East for the West. Opening to the East could be something that is about taking this unmatched geopolitical system and trying to find a way to help the East and the West to hold hands, to learn from each other, to learn peace. Something that we as economists have known for centuries. Trade with one another will quell wars because everyone's interest is live in peace and fight for everyone to do better. Even though economics is a bit of a selfish discipline. But isn't it better to be selfish among set rules? And that's what the rule of law is about. That's what international peace is about. That's a type of harmony that the purpose of global partnership have been fighting for decades. If you look at what's going on in the Ukraine, where there are people with just a shirt on their back and standing in front of armed Russian soldiers and tanks, this is about that being their country, that no one can come here uninvited. But if you come here in peace, we are willing to live together with you and work together with you for the betterment of each other, just like the European Union was found back in the day. And this is what I hope we'll be working towards from April 4th after the election. So thank you again for inviting me as a liberal to your event. Thank you. I'd like to invite next Gabi Bischoff, the S&D Vice President and co-chair for the task force on the KOFU.
Let me tell you that it's such a pleasure to be with you, with Kata, with Attila, with everyone here, because we are at the heart of Europe. And what we are experiencing at the moment is that we all hold our breath, because we don't know what the next days and weeks will bring, but we feel that something is turning. And we want to talk here in this situation about the future of Europe, about your future, about the future of the young generation. And to say, what do we have to make different so that Europeans can have a good life? And I wanted you to all remember, what were your feelings when your country joined the European Union? What were the hopes, the dreams, the fears? It was to have a better life together in Europe. And this is something we lost a bit along the way. And this is why we have this conference on the future of Europe. We ask citizens, normal people, 800, from all ways of life, from all countries, what should we do different? What should we do better? And I'm sure you all have ideas and proposals how we can do it. And I just wanted to speak about two proposals the citizens were giving us as politicians. I am also a member of this conference on the future of Europe. And one of the key proposals, it's the number one on the working group on a strong economy and social justice, is the proposal on fair minimum wages in Europe. Everyone that works in Europe should have a wage where he or she can live off. And this is not the case yet for 23 million people in Europe. And this is why it is so important that we, members of the European Parliament, independent where they come from which country, and also the member states agree on a strong directive to make sure that every worker will have more money in their pocket. And it's not only that we have 23 million people in Europe that work hard and can't make ends meet at the end of the month. But it's also that we are saying with this proposal, the Commission did, Commissioner Nicolas Schmit, who comes from our political family, he said, if we want to have a better life, we need good minimum wages, but we also need strong collective bargaining. We need strong trade unions, employers that negotiate better wages and working conditions. And this is why it is so important what is happening also in the member states. If you look at Hungary, and I had the opportunity this morning to talk with the trade unions here, we have a tax on the fundamental tool that trade unions have to fight for better wages, and that is the right to strike. Unacceptable in Europe. Because if you don't have strong unions and you have tools, and the right to strike is a fundamental right in Europe, it's a tool to get better wages and working conditions. This is unacceptable and is something we will not accept in Europe. But also, people all over Europe want to have good working time, for example. Everyone knows I'm going to work and enjoy going to work in many cases, but also what we can see with digitalization, also in the pandemic, is at a certain point, can we say stop after some time to say, I now want to go home? I want to also engage in a political party. I have a family, I have friends. I am not a working machine. And here also the second proposal the citizens made said, we need better and stronger standards all over Europe on the issues of working conditions and all of this. And we already have some, but it is not enough. And the other thing is, it's not often respected. So the citizens make proposals that are very, very close to your life, to our life. And the question will be, will we as a political family be strong enough to make sure that this conference is not just another talking shop, where we engage, we consult, we talk to citizens, but in the end we just continue what we ever did. So to see that this turning point we are with the war here, only a couple of 100 kilometers away, democracy threatened, I think the rule of law, that is the basis for everything, for democracy, and also a strong workers' voice. And this will lead to the better life that every one of you dreamt of when your country joined the European Union. And the good thing about it is that we are now in this fight together, all of us, independent where we come from. And what Orban and others might not understand, we speak different languages, we have different cultures, but we have the same values and the same rights, and we are going to fight for this, that this continues and gets stronger. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to discuss with you.
Thank you. Köszönjük szépen.
Thank you very much. I was asked to make the speeches a bit faster, shorter, to have more time for Q&A. Elven Böke from the president of the social group.
Colleagues, friends and comrades, I will try to be brief. And after the intervention of Gabi, I can be brief, because I think it was really in a nutshell what counts in Europe and what is at stake at the moment. I was asked by colleagues and by friends, is it really the right moment to discuss now social Europe, social opportunities at this moment when we are all in this gloomy mode, in those dark times? And I think, yes, it is the right moment. It is the right moment because we are discussing a counter-model to this authoritarian democracy against democracies or against systems which attacks the rule of law, fundamental rights. And when we are looking just a few hundred meters to the border, what we can see there is that the attack on international law, on sovereignty, on the rule of law, on fundamental rights, at this moment, it goes hand in hand with the attacks on social rights. And therefore, I think it is quite well chosen, the topic of today, social opportunities, social mobility, because this is the core of our counter model. You cannot make a distinction between social rights, fundamental social rights, and I would say fundamental rights in general and the rule of law. Both goes hand in hand. And it's not by chance. It's not by chance that those governments who always claim that they defend the interest of, let's say, ordinary people, of working people, exactly those governments attacks those rights. And those governments refuses any support at European level for more social progress. And that's the reason why we discuss these issues, especially in the Conference on the Future of Europe. I think this is the opportunity to bring our demands forward and to show across Europe, also in Hungary, to show people that Europe is not a threat to their social rights. No, it must bring progress to their social rights. But to be honest, we are not there at the moment. We are not there at the moment, and especially in Hungary, or with Hungary, we had a recent court case 2 years ago. The European Court of Justice decided in a court case that Hungarian workers who carried out the same work as their Austrian colleagues at the same place in Austria did not receive the collectively agreed minimum wage in Austria. Only the Hungarian one. And this is a scandal. 18 years after the accession of Hungary to the European Union, you don't have the right to the same wage at the same workplace for the same work. That's a principle we have to fight for. And therefore, one of our proposals in the Conference on the Future of Europe is to introduce a social progress protocol. It sounds bureaucratic, but to enshrine in the treaties that fundamental social rights for workers, for working people, should count at least the same like economic freedoms in the internal market. That's where we fight for, what we fight for. And once again, we have support from some governments, but not from those governments who are always claiming that they are in favor of social rights and working people, but in reality they are not. So therefore, this is really a turning point for Europe. This conflict, this war is a turning point for Europe. I think let's take this opportunity. And as Gabi said, minimum wages are key. They are key, and workers' rights, participatory rights of workers, a strong workers' voice are key for social Europe. I think it's unacceptable that in many member states, including Hungary, only a minority of workers benefit from collective agreements. They are excluded from collective agreements. So if you cannot manage, and if trade unions are weakened and cannot manage, then Europe has to step in and has to support them. We cannot allow that Europe withdraw from social policy. On the contrary, we have to make sure that Europe gives a push for social democracy. And that's what we fight for in the Conference on the Future of Europe. And as Gabi said, and I would insist on this, we have to make sure that we have tangible results in the end. Not only nice declarations, nice papers, we have them too often in Europe. No, we have to make sure that there is an impact on the life of working people and families across Europe. The same wage for the same work at the same workplace, decent wages, decent working conditions, and collective bargaining. Collective bargaining and workers' voice, participation rights for workers and trade union, they are key component of participatory democracy. That's what we fight for, and you have our full support, and I wish you really all the best. Also for the elections, I can only say, make a difference. Show that Europe and the people in Europe stand behind fundamental rights and the rule of law and behind a social Europe. Thank you very much.
Okay. The last presenter in our first panel, we invited a young activist. He's not an MEP yet, but he's on his way towards it. And he's an active participant of the online debate for Europe, and he was the most active, actually, so that's why we invited him to talk.
Dear Vice President of S&D, Vice Mayor of Budapest, MEPs, MPs, and guests, I'm pleased that I can be here at this event, at this Social Democrat Coffee event in Budapest, and I'm very happy that I was selected from the competition of the Progressive for Europe platform. In my short speech, I would like to raise just one important issue, and this is the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the education in general. I've been at the university when the first and the second wave of the pandemic hit Europe and the whole globe. To be honest, it was a really fast shift between the in-person and the remote teaching methods. But I have to say that I belong to the luckier group. I had laptop, I had smartphone, I had tablet, and I had the proper facility to participate fully in the online lectures. However, many of my colleagues didn't have it. They could not fulfill precisely the online lectures and everything what they needed to do to get the final grade. I would like to add another example. I'm coming from a rural area, from the Serbian border. There are a lot of small towns and cities. I know and I heard a lot of stories and some kind of rumors that the smaller high schools or primary schools could not provide proper help to those families who need it the most. They could not give them laptop and the facilities to fulfill the requirements of the online lectures. I know a family, to be honest, and the parents had just one smartphone and they had to decide to which children, the younger one or the older one, will give the smartphone to participate in the online lectures. I know that the education in general belongs to the member states, so it's a member state competence. However, I'm turning to the MEPs and the MPs that we need more Europe in education also. After the minimum wage, after the social rights, we need the same possibilities for all European students. And I'm concluding now. I've joined to this debate in order to shape the direction of the European Union, because I know that I have my voice and I would like to shape the Europe, because I have an image what I would like to achieve in 20 and 30 years. And I really encourage all of you in this room, the elders, the youngers, to do the same, because we are the future of the European Union. Thank you very much.
Köszönjük szépen.
Thank you very much. And now we are at the point where we close this panel by opening up for Q&A. I'd like to encourage all of you. There are no bad questions at this moment, so whatever questions you have, just feel free to ask them, because here we have the people you can ask them. And I think Szabolcs Nagy has given a very good basis, because he raised a very good, important matter. I would have said that if there are no questions and we're just looking at each other waiting for a question, I would have asked, like, what is there besides Erasmus programs? What can the EU do beside that to provide more young people in this region to get to other universities around Europe? But let's not go on that path, because the majority of children in rural areas simply couldn't attend online classes, or the minimum number of them. Why are they different from German students or richer students? But I really would like to give the floor, because I'm just a moderator here. I'm Csaba Szalai. I'm from Zala County, Senior People's, Old People's Parliament founder. And my question is, and request, is from those present is that, yes, equal work, equal wages, European level wages, and equal social benefits. But let's not forget about senior citizens, because our generation who built the countries after the Second World War, and we ran the country, and now many of us, including myself, receive minimum pension, and we are far from the situation we are just 80 kilometers from. Okay, Austrian pensioners have a higher standard of living than us, just 80 kilometers from Austria. So we also like to have an average or a European minimum pension. Are you addressing someone with your question, or just in general? Okay, who would like to answer to this question and request? Okay, I just grabbed the mic because during the MEP elections, both organizations of S&D, the Democratic Coalition and the Socialist Party, so both groups had very important points on the agenda, including minimum wages, minimum pension, and European health union, what I mentioned. And a few years ago, European leaders met in Stockholm, and it was due to our people, who many of us were there in Stockholm personally, so it was due to us that the EU said that we need another pillar to have a stable footing for this set of institutions. And this new pillar, the EU didn't want to talk about or think about, is the social pillar. And a key element of that pillar is the senior citizens' pension and care. Obviously, we can't say that we can create in the near future to have a monthly pension as close as Austrian pension levels, because that would be a bit far-fetched, but that to make the governments commit themselves to senior age security and to ensure the safety and security of senior citizens, and the EU should have a point in the annual country assessment and then allocate some funding in certain regions of Europe where it is most needed to get a common ground of proper pensions. I think this is something we can work for collectively, and I think I can say it on behalf of all my partners here. Hello, I'm Isabella Vicei-Fürst, independent Hungarian civil NGO mayor candidate. And mind you, there are some independents, because where there is no money, there are independent people. There's a quite unpleasant question I have. While I was listening to Gabi Bischoff and Oliver Röpke and the young person at the end, but I'm a sociologist, and it's quite an unpleasant question that is directed to not only the Hungarian opposition, but Hungarian government members who are not here, of course, but when also European Parliament members, that when you're going to face this terrible social fact, which we are all responsible for, and that social catastrophe we are responsible for in Hungary, Hungarian people have to live from 28,000 forints, which is say 100 euros. They freeze to death in their own homes because of lack of funds. Is the opposition aware that when we joined the EU in 2004, and at that time I was quite lucky, sitting next to the then at the gala dinner, sitting next to a Danish leader, and I was a university student at that time, sitting next to the Danish ambassador, and he asked me, and it was that me, as a third grade social student, what I think about, having a dream come true. We can join the EU. What will happen in EU? And I answered him that this is Hollywood. Anything can happen. Money will be stolen, and we're going to stay just as poor as we are right now. You can't be a prophet in your own home, even if you are a third-grade university student. 74% of Hungarian society was poor when we joined the EU, and it's exactly 74% of Hungarian society is in poverty now. So my question is to everybody, also those who weren't here in 2004, that the transformation countries, and when we talk about the democratic deficit and this election autocracy, so basically I'd like to point out that this was made from the EU funding in Hungary, because the Hungarian Greens have been telling you to stop funding since 2012. So I really would like to know whether we're going to have palpable results after this conference to Hungarian people, workers, people, poor people, and anywhere in Middle and Central and Eastern Europe and in the Ukraine. So basically this is the question. And the quotation to finish off, which is from Count Gály. Hungary, democracy is such a luxury in Hungary which we cannot afford. And if I got Hugo Habermas and Dahrendorf, then the Germans note exactly that getting a democratic structure ready takes 3 generations, and we have only 32 years passed in Hungary, so we cannot expect for another 80 years to have a similarly strong democracy in Hungary as there are in Western Europe. Any response?
Yes, I would like to address directly the question, because I refer to it. Indeed, the promise is, and this was the case in all the other enlargement rounds of the European Union, is that what we call, it sounds also a bit bureaucratic, upward convergence. So we say the improvement of living and working conditions will not happen from one moment to another, but it will happen over time. And if we look at the enlargements with Portugal, with Spain and other countries, with Ireland was also a very poor country, it worked over time. But what we realized since a couple of years, that this process didn't continue in this big enlargement round. In some countries, it improved, and in others not. And this is why it is so important. And this also refers to the question of the pensions. You need decent wages. That's the basis for the people. If you don't have a more speedier way of developing wages and income, you will always have poor pensioners. We also have poor pensioners in Western countries. In the country I come from, a lot of women especially are poor pensioners. But to say we really need to do more in Europe to improve and raise the wages of working people. And I mean really to have a situation that people work full-time and have poverty wages in one of the richest continents in the world is totally unacceptable. And here we have to speed up. And I think this is also the message from the citizens. They say, remember your promises. Remember that the promise of Europe is not to have the biggest market in the world. The promise of Europe is to have a common market to improve the working and living conditions. And what we see in countries also here is who is profiting, who is getting all the money. It gets stuck in some pockets. And also here, and I think in the next panel, my colleagues will talk about this. This is essential. And if this goes together, we can again, and here, this is why I said, remember your dreams when you joined the European Union. We have stronger to fight for us and to see this conference as a possibility to do so, but we have to have a lot of pressure, and we need broad alliances of progressives, of NGOs, of a lot of organizations if we want to achieve it. But I'm still positive that it is possible, because I still believe that this project is not just a project for corrupt elites or for the elites to send their children to London to the School of Economics or whatever, but it's a project where we want to make sure that every student, independent if he lives in a very small village somewhere in a border town or in the big city of Berlin or Madrid, has a future. And that we invest the money we have in this young generation, and therefore also the citizens had the same proposal as you. I think it's good. It shows that it's good sometimes to broaden your view and have a lot of young people also at the table, because more than 30% of this conference members, the citizens panels, are young people below 25, makes also a difference. So let's fight again for this dream of Europe and not leave it to the autocrats and to the people that know how to use the money to fill their pockets.
Thank you. Very, very briefly, because I still can complement what Gabi has said, but I would make two points on the pensions and on the poverty question. I think it's true, there was a promise that the development will go upward. And it's true that this promise hasn't kept in last years. And I fully agree that we will not achieve in next years that Hungarian pensions will reach the Austrian level. But what we can do is that we set also at European level minimum standards, ambitious minimum standards. I think this is the way forward for us, because we have different systems across Europe, different social systems, social protection systems, and the argument is always, well, you can't harmonize them, so please leave it up to the member states. They should deal with social issues and Europe deals with the internal market. No, we cannot accept this anymore. We have to set ambitious social standards at European level, even for social protection systems. One example, I've learned that in Hungary, if you get unemployed, even after many years or decades that you have paid in the unemployment insurance system, you're entitled only to unemployment insurance assistance for some month. And then it's over. Then it's over. In other countries, you get it for years, even almost unlimited. How can this be possible in one union, though such different social standards? So let's set, at least gradually, social standards and say we have to set minimum standards at European level, that people, if they contributed in the systems, they should at least be entitled to a support which allows for decent life. I think this is the minimum. And when it comes to the conference on the future of Europe, then please, colleagues, now we come in a crucial phase here, because this conference will finish in a few weeks. And this can't be possible. This can't be possible. We have to listen to the citizens, but also to the trade unions. And if there are clear demands, then the conference has to be prolonged, and it must be clear that we can make the changes in order to allow and to realize all the demands. So I really make the appeal, prolong this conference, that it will be longer, and make sure that this social Europe will be really implemented in the proposals for this conference on the future of Europe, because people are not interested in competences or subsidiarity issues. They are interested in solutions. And therefore Europe and this conference has to deliver in order to make a better life possible for working people. Thank you.
I think many of us will be positive after 3rd of April. Az úr,
Köszönöm szépen. Lendva.
Thank you. Gábor Lendvai. I came here from Western Hungary by invitation. I don't know how to summarize all what I have in mind, but it's very important because I see a lot of young people here and quite many senior citizens like myself, that there is a huge bridge between us, which we didn't teach our children, not everybody taught their children. And that bridge is very important for our common future. We have to know where we are coming from and where we are going, what is our goal, what we want to do. When I was a kid, there were mines and barbed wire all around the country, and Europe was far, and we didn't even dream of getting to Europe as such one day, and we could be part of this continent as decent, respectful, working people, and that we could exist and live on the same standard, or whether we can have at least goals and ambitions to live as people in Western Europe live then. Young people know only as much that mobility is free, and they just take some euro from the bank and they travel around Europe, wherever they want to. We didn't have this chance, and you should know that it was very difficult for us. Even after '89 in Hungary, when you wanted to make business, and I talked to some Spanish friends and business partners, and they asked me like, okay, when you take a loan, how much interest do you pay? Well, I said, well, it's about 30-40%. And how much do you pay? We pay 10% interest. So there was no equality in business either. I don't know how the EU knows the equal opportunities in Hungary before ascending the EU. It's still difficult. We are not equal. We have low fundings, and whatever support we get from the EU, well, that money is unfortunately uncontrolled and is lost somewhere in channels.
I really don't know how this works in the EU. I mean, how financial auditing mechanisms work like. I don't know the level on which accountability for finances is done. So who checks? We give whatever amount of euros to whatever country. Who checks? What happened with that money? Has it actually been used to build something, really? And if so, if that's what is claimed, does anyone check? Because, you know, if I give some money from the communities amounts to implement some common goals, then I think it should be checked. And also check how much a given project actually really costs. And this is really what I can recommend that my young friends here can do. You always consider where you're starting from and where you have reached. That is the only thing that I and probably my age group can request. And please, don't forget about the elderly, because their experience is quite valuable. Thank you. I'd like to answer that one. That's because I do work in as a senior member of the EP's Budget Control Committee. And I think, indeed, it is a legitimate complaint to request a more stringent auditing of the EU's funds. My opinion is that the biggest achievements, the biggest advances of this current cycle is that at the end of 2020, the European Parliament adopted the draft on the rule of law mechanism. And what this is about is to afford much more protection to the EU's funds in respect of any member state who does not respect the basic rules of the EU. This is what the Hungarian government is experiencing the results of now. The reason that a fraudulent member state is not getting money currently, we talking about Mr. Orbán and his cabinet, because they are not sympathetic to the EU, but because they have stolen before and they cannot guarantee that they will not steal in the future. This is what that one is about. A short question, if you'll allow. All of the topics is, I believe, very welcome. Healthcare, education, care for the elderly, all of these matters are way, way beyond any dispute, and all of them require a lot of help. So I'd really like to ask about the reality of these things. Does this have the funding behind it? In other words, is it possible to realize these very pleasant dreams? I mean, you know, who wouldn't welcome going nearer to the Western European level of minimum wages? But there's any number of enterprises, especially in small settlements, where it would be impossible for those businesses to finance that minimum wage level. What would the solution? Or pensions. The matter of pensions, I am also, if you don't mind me saying, a sufferer of the pension system, but we have to realize that the pension fund is producing a loss, probably in many other countries elsewhere, but here in Hungary, very much so. So should we try to scull that mechanism, that fund, and try to sink it? I really couldn't say any specialty field, any functional area that wouldn't be happy to receive more money or request for more money. But if you give all the money requested to everyone, then you just end up with sovereign debt at a level that will bankrupt your country. So, the gist. How far can we handle such requests, such demands, and how is Hungary and Europe's relationship shaping up in that respect?
A key question. And the idea at the moment of the European Union is to say, we define where the poverty level is. And we don't have to make up our mind because it's already internationally defined. It's 60% of the national median wage, that is the average, or 50% of the average wage. And we will not have one minimum wage that will be the same in all countries, but to say we look at every national situation and we take the 60% of the median wage, and then we look how far in the member state are they away from that. And we have 3-4 member states that already are there, the French, for example, but we have a lot, including my country, Germany, where we are still far away, and in Hungary too. And then we would say we are doing it all at the same time. And this will mean all over Europe, you will not have an advantage by not doing it. But we say together, we encourage the governments to do it and to raise it to this level of the poverty line at the same time. And this will also bring more money in the pension systems, because it is according to the wages. And to make sure that we use this, we are talking now after the pandemic about a recovery for the people. And part of this recovery is also that we have a project where we raise wages and also in the perspective with this raise pensions and make the pension systems more sustainable. And what we have to see at the same time is that we have not more and more people, especially young people, in precarious jobs without any social security, in new forms of work, but to make sure that everyone that works has a decent wage, at least the minimum wage. But the minimum wage is just, it is not our goal that everyone has the minimum wage, but to say this is the minimum we define, and then we want better wages, negotiated, better wages for European people here. And if we have this joint defined line, it will be easier. And it will take up the fears you have. And instead, because we have to look at our pension systems indeed, and to make sure that we have more people paying into the pension systems. And only this is the basis so that people can have better pensions in the future. And this is one element. It will not solve all the problems, but it's a first huge step. The European Union never, ever dared to do that. And I think you refer to the Gothenburg summit when we did the social pillar. And I always can only repeat myself. I was there in Göteborg. If anyone would have told me in 5 years we would have a proposal for minimum wages in Europe, I would have said, I love dreamers, but this will never be the reality. But it is now, and we now have to make sure that it's also going to happen. And it's a couple of governments that are totally against this proposal. And guess what position Hungary takes in the Council regarding fair minimum wages? It's opposing it. And I think here it needs more pressure and better policies to make sure that in the end also in the Council we have a qualitative majority in support for fair minimum wages. And I think also to address the pension gap that we still have in many, many member states. Thank you.
Azt javasolnám most, ha meg
If you don't mind, let me propose that there are multiple questions that speak to the next session, to listen to the presenters for that next section, and then go through the questions. The next topic that is on our agenda is defending democratic values. And, you know, if you don't mind, I'd like to start the call first of all with Birgit Zippel from the spokesperson and coordinator for the Liberal Committee.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me, and I'm really happy that I could make it here and look into the faces of all the Hungarian citizens that are here. And maybe at the beginning, before talking about the rule of law and democracy, I would like to take you back some years to the days when Hungary, like also other countries, became a member of European Union. And I remember when that happened, that I was really happy about that. Why? Because I was happy that we are, again, after all the years with the so-called Iron Curtain, we were reunited. And why am I saying we were reunited? Because some people, some younger people might not remember, but before all the years of the Iron Curtain, many people traveled around Europe. They traveled from Hungary to Germany to France to Spain, but also other way around, from Spain, from Germany, from Sweden to Hungary. And they did not only travel, they settled in other countries. They became citizens of other countries. So to some extent, we are all a little bit a mixture of all the European countries. We shouldn't forget about that. And I was also very happy that after these years of the Iron Curtain, our friends in Hungary were able to join European values, democracy, rule of law. And after the debate we just had about social welfare, about poverty, I remember someone was saying, but why should we be interested in rule of law and democracy? Because, of course, I understand, first of all, you have an interest to pay for your life, to pay for the life of your families. So why is it important? Why should we care for the rule of law? Because only if you are in a democracy, and we also talked about corruption, we talked about that from many fundings, money is ending up in the pockets of only a few people. But only if you are in a democracy, if you have media freedom, freedom of speech, if you have independent society, independent NGOs, only then you have a chance, together with the media, organizations, you as a citizen, only in a democracy you really have a chance to ask questions. To ask, hey, what is it? Where is the funding ending up? Why don't we get profit from all the money that is coming from different sources? Only then you have a chance to hold people accountable. And you can do it only in a democracy without being afraid that you are sanctioned in a negative way, that you are kicked off business opportunities. So that's why democracy is so important. And how is democracy then linked to the rule of law? I know that some crazy people are defining rule of law as, hey, everything's perfectly fine, because everything we are doing is based on laws. So we have legislation, we have a parliament, so why do you complain? It's okay, we have a law. No, it's not okay, because even if a parliament has been elected, even according to democratic rule, you can go too far. But in European Union that is based on common values, rule of law is not something separated from democracy. In European Union, rule of law means that you have to create the rules in a way that you protect democracy, that you protect fundamental rights. And fundamental rights also mean that minorities are respected and that they also have rights. It also means that the opposition parties have rights, not only when being in parliament, but also to go vocal in an election, before an election, that they have the possibility to be heard and they are not kicked off. And I'm not only talking about money, I'm talking about the possibility to be visible in media, in television, in many other places. Do we have that possibility really for all the political groups? So it's so important that we have democracy, that we have rule of law, and that's coming back to the days when Hungary became a member of European Union. I'm so angry, I'm frustrated, I'm sorry, because I see that what you deserve as citizens, to have these common rights of democracy and rule of law, it's not only money that it's stolen from your pockets, it's your rights and the possibilities to influence your life, to influence the political sphere you are living in. And that's why I think that also in these times it's so important to talk about rule of law and democracy. And let's not forget, it's not a vague idea we are talking about. When Hungary and all the other countries became members of European Union, they signed the treaties. And the treaties clearly say we are a union of democracies. And the very first articles of our treaties are talking about rule of law and democracy. So we should not underestimate how important it is. And I'm quite convinced that some of my colleagues will go in more details, maybe on the rule of law regarding independence of judiciary. Because you might find out what is going on in your country, what is going wrong. But if there is no independent judiciary to go behind that and hold people accountable, so what is it worth that you know about it? And therefore, I'm very happy to be here today with you. I'm very happy that hopefully together we can come back to really, within European Union, to fight more together for rule of law and democracy. And one final sentence maybe, because in these days we also have to talk about what is going on directly in front of our doors, where an autocrat and dictator brought back war directly in front of our doors. And I think that also shows where we can end up when citizens don't have a vote to say, when citizens are not heard, but one person is deciding what's going on for its own interest. So it's high time that we ensure democracy, that we ensure rule of law, fundamental rights, and then together with united forces can also fight for what we talked about in the first round, which is social rights and fight back poverty in all of our member states. Thank you very much.
Rónai Sándor EP képviselőt kérem meg most.
Köszönöm szépen, tisztelt
Mr. Sandrone, MEP. Thank you very much. Esteemed colleagues, friends, members and guests. I'm very happy that you accepted our invitation and you're here with us. Can I start by anything else than saying that it's very difficult nowadays what is happening right over the border to Hungary, right on the boundary of Europe as the Union. And that is a tragedy that you simply cannot prepare for. And I'm pretty sure I can speak on behalf of all of us that when I express my and our gratitude for the individuals, for the NGOs or the civil organizations who travel to the border and help those fleeing the Ukraine. At the same time, I also have to call upon the Hungarian government to do its job and provide the help it has taken away recently, or not so recently, from municipal governments in their financing, so they in turn can help refugees from the Ukraine. So back in 2019, we weren't really talking about the comes to the future of Europe, rather it was an MEP election campaign. That was the backdrop for starting the conference. Back then, with Klára Dobrev and other DK politicians from Hungary, we went on a road trip here in Hungary. We wanted to share with everyone in the country what our vision is for Europe. Sure, at first glance, those were social promises. We promised that what we're going to be working for is for Hungarian citizens not to be second-rank citizens, but citizens of the EU with terms and conditions at least equal to everywhere else in Europe. So that's when we start talking about EU pensions, EU minimum wages, as a Szabolcs said, an education minimum. And those are very important. But we also promised something else. We said that we are going to do everything we can to protect European funding, protect that from Viktor Orbán stashing it in his pockets and using that money to launch hate campaigns against my colleagues, against you, against minorities, against any person or organization with whom he does not agree. As I answered to a question just before, the EU has taken a very important step. The rule of law mechanism is exactly for this purpose. We can use it to protect the money paid by European Union taxpayers, and you can use it to get a country who fails to abide by the European Union's rules and principles not to receive any of its money either. I think we took a very serious step, and we're also about to take another very serious step. Viktor Orbán today has to decide whether he wants to join Putin or to stay in the Europe. All of us in a month from now will need to decide whether we want the EU or we want something else. Me personally, I vote for the EU. We need a European Union, a Europe that makes no distinction between its citizens and can represent the values for which we are working. And I request all of you join us in that effort. Thank you. Ms. Catherine Barney, Deputy Chairman of the European Parliament.
Of course, my first thoughts also go to Ukraine and to the terrible attacks that these people are facing by a dictator. And I think that Vladimir Putin miscalculated a lot of things. It didn't work out as he thought it would. He miscalculated the solidarity in the whole world and also the solidarity of the whole European Union, the unity of the European Union. Now, if we look a bit behind, are we really all united in the European Union? I have learned, for example, today that the Fidesz members in the European Parliament have voted for our resolution, But here in Hungary, they say that they voted against. They do. I have learned that public media in Hungary is still pushing Putin propaganda when it comes to this war and who started it and who is the guilty. And I see a prime minister who is kind of, you know, wobbly if he is for or against, or for or against. It depends on who is asking. So I see one country, I see one government where you cannot be sure that they stand for the European solidarity and for our values. Why is that? I learned that Putin was here in Budapest not so long ago. I learned that I think the last official guest that Viktor Orban received was Marine Le Pen. And I learned that the visit of Mr. Erdogan was already planned, and I don't know if it's going to come now, but that is one of the next ones to be here. So what we see is that clearly there is a list of persons that Mr. Orban likes to align with. And why is that? Because apparently they share a common sense of their values. Because I publicly tend to say that Mr. Orban is killing Hungarian democracy. Maybe he has already, and we don't yet all know or feel it. Because when you walk through this beautiful city of Budapest, you just feel fabulous. I walked yesterday evening with all these bars and restaurants, and it's a fantastic country, it's a fantastic town. But Viktor Orban has done everything he can to prevent anyone else to take over power, which is fine as long as you stick to the rules. Everybody wants to keep him in power, of course. But what did he do? Fidesz and Viktor Orban has introduced more than 700 changes in electoral law. 700 changes. With not even 50% of the votes in the last general election, he gained a 2/3 majority. How can that happen? And for the next elections to come, the opposition needs 4% more of votes to gain. 4% more than Fidesz would need to gain. Because he changed everything in his favor. Media is not free. You know that. You have Kezma, this foundation that is controlled by Fidesz with, I think, more than 600 media enterprises being under control. Very, very few free media still left. We have sanctioning the opposition. We have... I don't understand Hungarian, but I'm sure you're right. The way you said it. We have a silence of critical scientists, all sorts of things. So he doesn't want to be beat in this election. That everyone knows. But what not everyone knows, even if he gets beat in the election, he doesn't want to leave the power. Because for over 300, quite exactly 320 measures to change, you need a 2/3 majority in this country. You can't even change the tax rates if you only have a normal majority in parliament. You need a 2/3 majority. And you need a 2/3 majority to replace just about any public post in this country. So even if the opposition wins, we will have all the Orban friends still in the important places. Not talking about the money, huh? I'm not talking about the money. He has found ways how the money will, even if he loses the elections, will still go to his own pockets via foundations, etc. And the third part, and very little people, at least in the rest of Europe, know about it. Here probably more people know about it, but I find this very striking. Even if he loses the election, he has the power to overturn a new parliament and a new government within a year. How does he do that? There is a body which is called the Budget Council, consisting of 3 people. 2 of them are Orban people. You only need 2 votes. They have to accept the budget of the parliament. If they refuse 2 times, we will have new elections. So we have we have a prime minister who has used undemocratic means to prevent anyone from beating him in the elections. We have a prime minister who, even in the case of losing the elections, will hold on to every sort of power and control. And we have a prime minister who, even if he loses the elections, has the power to overturn a new government and a new parliament. Now, democracy is power limited in time. It is power of the people. It is power of the Hungarian people. And if the Hungarian people decide that they do not want Viktor Orban anymore, then Viktor Orban has to let go of power and money. It's as easy as that. That is democracy. So this is why I'm saying, and I'm saying it loud and publicly, because the European public does not know. European media do not know. Not even the Hungarian media I talked to today know it in total. This is a complete destruction of democracy, even if it feels wonderful to be in Budapest at night. It is a complete destruction of democracy. And this is why Viktor Orban feels close to people like Putin, to people like Marine Le Pen, to people like Erdogan. This is because they are brothers in mind. And this is why it is so crucial that you, the Hungarian opposition, united, beat this man in these elections. It might be the last chance to do it. He will continue this way. He will make Hungary even more undemocratic where he can. So this is the election, and we have to tell it loud and clear to the Hungarian people. If you want to stay a democratic country, if you want to stay a part of the European Union, because you can only stay part of the European Union if you are a democracy, then you have to vote for a different country. You have to vote for a different government. Please do it.
Megkérném Piri.
I'd like to ask Kati Piri, Dutch MEP. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I know that you thought that this conference is running in two languages, Hungarian and English, but there will be a third language, which is like a Hungarian-English-Dutch mixture, but I hope you do understand what I'm talking about. This morning, I saw a picture on the internet on Lviv where a young father where his child and wife were on the train, and the 2-year-old boy is laughing because he doesn't know what's going on around him. And we see pictures like this about Ukraine nowadays. We talk about democracy, and you know, many of you, of the speakers, mentioned that hundreds of kilometers away, people are actually fighting for their freedom and democracy, like as Hungarians did and fought for the freedom. We must not forget that this always remains a battle, a fight we have to fight. Who wanted this war? Me as a Dutch representative, I could say none of us in Holland. Hungarians didn't want it either. Ukrainians didn't want it either, and I'm dead sure that average Russian citizens didn't want this war either. This is Putin's war, one person's war, and one person is responsible for this war. What do we have to do in Europe? There are three things which are very important in my opinion. First, solidarity with Ukrainians. And it's very heartwarming to see. Yesterday we were at the border, yesterday we went to Western Railway Station, that all the volunteers and the people help with whatever they can in Hungary and help all the people who leave Ukraine, who leave their homes, and they don't know what future brings for them. And Hungarians are here to help. That's one, solidarity. Secondly, is to take Putin and his comrades, his cronies, who've been for years, nay, for decades, who've been stealing people's money for decades, and we should understand it's something we do not accept in the EU. This is not a way to enter a country in a tank and run them over. And the third one is that we hold together in the European Union. We stand together because there is nothing stronger than standing together and acting together. And since we are here, let's not forget how we came here. Because Europe has been dreaming and was lulled. You don't have to be surprised as to what Putin became, how he became what he is now. He didn't happen overnight. He's always been like that. And it actually hurts that to seeing the money he's been spending on this war and how he finances this war, and he uses our money to fund his war atrocities because he's so dependent. We made ourselves so dependent on his gas supply. Let's not forget, where did these oligarchs collect their money? Because they could invest and hide their money in Western countries, in Western banks. And we shouldn't forget that we're not talking about Georgia and Chechnya in 2014, when 199 Dutch citizens on a plane were shot. What he did in Russia with Nemtsov, what he's doing with Navalny. Now this is Putin, and people are standing with him for years. We should not forget that until last week, the world was different in Hungary as well. And who were the ones who were standing with him? Well, yeah, I think we all know. Yeah, Orban and Fidesz and many extreme right-wing parties in Europe. So I think showing solidarity with Ukrainians is something where we can show that it's time for us to clean Europe, purge Europe of these dictators, and to work for a better Hungary and a better future in Europe, and stand together and act together for democracy. Sorry for my bad Hungarian. I'd like to ask Vice Mayor Kata Tyttö. I'm looking at others that they both talk and walk at the same time, and they are talking sense. I don't know if I can do that. So there have been a lot of things said how Hungarian democracy has been suffering, and I don't want to, cut my veins, but rather I would focus on the reserves we have. And one of the reserves that's really striking for me, and I don't know, perhaps our European guests didn't even notice it, that among the presenters there are a lot of high-ranking politicians, fraction leaders, whips, previous ministers, and the majority of them are women. This is something surprising in Hungary, because of 10 politicians, you have one woman. No matter whether it's county level, local government, a village mayor, parliament representative, whatever, 1 in 10 is woman. So, as we know, where Hungarian democracy has reserves, well, in Hungarian women, surely there are. But obviously, me being a municipality politician and vice mayor, and when we talk about trouble, major trouble, and can we talk about other problems, minor troubles, then, well, we learned that, well, whenever there is a major trouble, you have to take the garbage out and do the other stuff. So, when there was the pandemic, you can do a lot of things in home office, but you can't drive a tram or train or bus or clean the roads, or, there are many things that you still have to do, the daily routine, the chores. And both as a vice mayor and the mother, in addition, I also had to tend my family and my children. So, in the municipality politics, we learn that even there is any major trouble, there are the minor chores and troubles that you also have to attend, and you can attend. Now we got to the point to local governments, to municipalities. Now, when we talk about the municipalities, most of the time I talk about the Budapest Transport Company and the Fudan University, and in the EU we talk about the reserves in municipalities. When we talk about the climate goals and the common energy standards and energy goals, we do have the ambitions and we do have the reserves and we say that in real life in Budapest, in action, when the government didn't do anything, that it was the municipalities that were the first to acquire and buy masks. When the government didn't run tests, the municipalities provided free tests. We were the first to make decisions when the government did not. So there are reserves. So when we talk about democracy reserves, you've got the municipalities for you. Why is it important? Because we are running up for elections in a country where democracy has been struck many times, where the prime minister is not ready for an open debate, when the parliament's answer or the PM's answer, the two key questions like Merry Christmas. And what happened at municipalities after 2019? Everybody was afraid that this multicolored coalition, what we call, the rainbow coalition, because I love rainbows, but everybody was afraid, like, oh, this wouldn't work. It's so multifaceted. They can't govern because you can't pull in one direction because of being multicolored. But we proved that we could. Many parties can work together, and we opened the municipalities. We opened participation. But still, the framework here is the future of Europe, which is exactly about how we connect with those who are ready to connect. And what about municipality? Municipality is about, and participation is about having a word in what will happen in my country, in my town, in my village, with my taxes. So when I talk about reserves, I have to remind you, there are a lot of reserves. There are women and municipalities. They are the reserves for you. So, and the end of the panel, Sándor Ihász, the head of prosecution and the former head of appellate prosecution. Right, I was asked to talk about the legal environment and talk as an attorney here, and to somehow assess the current status of a snapshot of Hungarian democracy. So I would say a stupid joke here, like, if you talk about that person, you either say something good or say nothing, so I should stop talking now. But it's a bit better because Hungarian democracy is not dead, it just needs intensive care. So for almost 20 years in the EU, and then when I'm told that we don't know what rule of law is and we don't know what democracy is by an EU representative, then it's a shame for us. And that, pointing out the absurdity of this situation requires an EU court decision or an EU resolution, then it's another shame. So when we talk about rule of law, we could say that that's a professional and legal approach which goes together with democracy. So democratic rule of law would be the set phrase. So we say, which of us do we have? Because it's illiberal and whatever, it's very strange. So both concepts are a bit of trouble in Hungary, and as for interpretation. But if you look at the rule of law, because my task is to assess that, then there are two components that I should highlight here. One is legal security and justice. So if you enforce law, then you do not just enforce law only formally, so like adopting an act has to be, legal and formally good, but it should also reflect the citizens and the public interest. It's not just the state or the government's interest. So if it is not the case, then there is trouble and it's red flag. So legal enforcement, law enforcement, is safe and secure legally if it's not only legal but legitimate, that is not only formally but the content. Older people may remember the Amphora company where it advertised format and content, and they should match. So this should match here, and why we are at it. This legal security or security of law and this fundamental pillar, and the fundamental law we have here, which used to be called a constitution, and it's been amended a few times in a certain direction, and we could also use a laptop on an airplane, as the joke goes, that we can even make a better constitution. But in a rule of law, our constitution is based on social consensus and should be legally and legitimately adopted, and it wouldn't be only a reference point, and it wouldn't be set in concrete as it was in Hungary, because it was formally adopted legally, but only formally. But that's not enough, because it doesn't reflect the citizens' wishes and desires and the consensus. So this is missing, the content is missing. The other one, equality before law. What kind of rule of law is where there are people who are equal and are more equal, if you recall 1984 by Orwell. Sorry, is the animal farm. So when we talk about law enforcement and prosecution and the way it operates, and as to who is prosecuted against and who is prosecuted not against, that's another problem when there are restrictions on who we can act against and on what cases the prosecution can act. So there is no consistency in here, which should be as a basis in the rule of law. Okay, predictability is another point. In a rule of law, when it is Christmas time and everybody is just celebrating with family, and then a hodgepodge act is passed, which includes social aspects and has other impacts. Let me know that when I was a young attorney and we went on a business meeting, we were somewhat concerned, like when we asked each other, like, wasn't there any amendment, law amendment, so that, it wasn't so bad, but similarly, like spontaneous law amendments done overnight without questioning the parliament because of the 2/3 and because of now the emergency situation is by far not rule of law, and it is very far from democracy. So the legal conditions and environment here is something that is not predictable, because citizens cannot know what laws will be in effect tomorrow. Now, as for Hungary, it's basically we voted some time ago for this. It's pretty much like a club membership. If you want to enter a club, then based on gentleman's agreement you go, and then you accept the gentleman's agreement and the unwritten rules, so you don't spit in the club and you don't do uncivilized things. So the EU, what we joined us, so we weren't invited to the EU, we wanted to join, and everybody said it was a success and a huge advancement for the country. Now, after 18 years' time, I just don't understand the government and our leaders that we can disregard the rules of this club that we joined 18 years ago. So it is very sad that the EU bodies and court and the Commission have to run and show us directions and give and issue restrictions and remind the Hungarian government about the rules and the gentleman's rules and gentleman's agreement we had with the EU, not to mention the written rules. Now, if we talk about the negative aspects of enforcement and its prosecution. Prosecution is basically a state within the state, is a completely uncontrollable and unreliable, or rather unaccountable organization. Why is this? Because the prosecution is sort of independent and it belongs to the parliament. It's under the parliament, not under the government. The problem here is that the general attorney's responsibility, now I'm telling about, like, as a layman, like, imagine like a pyramid and the pharaoh is the general attorney, the general prosecutor has a one-person decision competence, doesn't have to justify anybody and is not accountable, not to mention politically. Therefore, the parliament's only tool to control the prosecution is once a year assessment, once a year presentation by the general prosecutor, and the parliament doesn't accept this assessment and report, the general prosecutor is not removed, so there are no consequences. Another parliamentary tool for controlling the prosecution is written questions. So they get the question and the prosecutor replies, and that's it. Whether the answer is satisfactory or not, it makes no difference. You cannot really ask another question or really appeal against the answer. So basically, the prosecution as an organization does whatever it wants to because there is no accountability. The general attorney, how could the general attorney and general prosecution be have a criminal procedure initiated against? Well, the general prosecutor would initiate the suspension of its right, of its exemption right, and then after that, then the prosecution organization would proceed against the general prosecution, and that's it. So it's pretty much like a comedy, impossible. And secondly, legal remedy in an investigation, if there is any criminal procedure is going on, so there is an investigative part before the court part, the judicial part, and so in a case where there is a priority case for social interest and regards EU funds and has media coverage and other publicity or covers people that are sensitive or important, then the prosecution has the right to do it legally, because there's a strong hierarchy within the prosecution and there's a discretionary hierarchy, so the prosecution can do to stop in the investigative case, in the investigative part, and to basically define the professional conditions criteria for investigation acts, and then to decide on a legal remedy against such act. So if you want to put suspicion on someone, it's okay, but the prosecutor has to lay down the text and has to repeat it and check it verbatim and correct it and give it an instruction that this is what you have to say a suspect. And when you tell this a suspect, then the suspect can lodge an appeal, which is again decided by the same prosecution. So legal remedies is only formal. it is not effective. So, and I could continue with coming up with other examples because I've been talking too much, but I try to come up with examples where I'm trying to focus on not the political aspects of the operations here, but the legal, so professional legal approach to how things are working in Hungary. So facts are stubborn things. You can debate them, but they are there. Second thing, unfortunately, we are at the point that there is a mayor against whom, Budapest mayor, against whom just in the middle of a campaign, he was suspected and criminal proceedings were started against him, and perfect timing, and obviously the investigation is just at the point, how come, surprise, surprise, that it's an investigation. So, and I recall that the prosecutor delivered the summons, the subpoena personally before the elections. So, you know, you can see that there is no independence here on the side of prosecution. It is wholly controlled by government and government interests. So the prosecutor act in a way that, you know, raises questions of independence, of accountability, of many questions. So basically, these procedures and all procedures can be continued for years. So investigations can be stretched up to 2 years. And by the time it lapses or it becomes time-barred, and, you know, the structure, the prosecution organization is unaccountable. And if you look at it holistically, then we have to see that prosecution is unfortunately a good tool and serves politics, government politics. Like Wyszynski is not a nice word for everybody who is in the legal attorney, and Wyszynski was a Soviet attorney, and he said that criminal law is the handmaid of politics, and that's the end of democracy. So you can think that there are some procedures in Hungary, criminal proceedings, which are fully capable of cutting the professional career of anybody in politics or anywhere. So basically people can be in criminal procedures for years and nobody will be interested in whether they are acquitted because they are exposed, and everybody is exposed to such proceedings. And this is very far from rule of law. And if the Ministry of Interior says to the media, like, what's wrong about the Pegasus affair? Well, we've got a good rule, we've got a data protection officer, which has another name now, and everybody says that, well, yeah, okay, the Chamber of Attorneys was really tagged, and this is okay in the rule of law, but the communication to the media, it's pretty okay, and tapping the phones of media people and businessmen, it's pretty okay. And this is what was published in the press. And, well, is it rule of law? I have my doubts, but probably I'm too strict about that. I just thought I would share these thoughts with you. So the lack of proper legal remedy, lack of transparency, and besides many other problems, really raises serious doubts that this is really serves the rule of law. Secondly, the courts, the judicial system, the head of the judicial office has never been a judge himself. He was head of the ombudsman's office and he held some other positions. But another question, how can you be in such a position? And if there are some dedicated courts established that deal with legal remedies regarding the elections, or if a constitutional court member, a judge, is elected, and if there is any personal legislation somewhere, like setting an age limit, like 70 years or 75 years age limit, if there is such a legislation in place in a country, then again it raises doubts about rules of law. And if an office can be held for more than 5 years, 9 years, then that's another question. And also, it's written in the press that the bailiffs, chamber of bailiffs, is involved in a case where there was a judge who was an independent judge, and he wasn't fired actually, but got to the point where he was basically threatened indirectly, and his work life was made impossible. And again, what was published in the press, I don't know if it's true. I just collected what I read in the press and that accounted as facts. So it was said that the judge couldn't be fired but could make his situation worse in terms of employment. So how could citizens trust the courts in any kind of litigation, in disciplinary matters, employment matters? How could you trust the court, the system, judicial system, not the judge personally, but the whole system, mind you, because, if the court and the judge proceed just based on his knowledge and professionalism and conscience, and how do you know that? And mind you, another death of law is abuse of law. So if you create some legislation that is pretty much works towards your own interests, so formally they are completely legal, but so it looks legitimate, but the content is not, because it is biased. There was the land sharing and the land business and the tobacco shop business. There were some pieces of legislation that pretty much were biased towards a certain group of people.
And the most important thing, and I'd really like to apologize everyone who is for the EU, and I don't want to speak against it, but still, today's government, the only purpose they see in the EU is to use it as a milking cow. That's the only thing it's good for, taking all the money they can. And then we have another problem. In terms of legal techniques, we are facing alignment in totally professional, very well paid legal teams who will find the pro forma legal background for all of that. So formally speaking, it is legal. All the rest, well, not necessarily so, but formally it is legal. So all of the public revenue, whether from EU funding or from taxes and so on and so forth, all of that, or at least a good part of it, is being siphoned off into private pockets through a diverse assortment of solutions, such as, say, private foundations and so on. So, indeed, the fundamentals of the rule of law are again violated. Sorry, I really just want to say one more sentence. That being is what I wish for us, all of us, and not only for beyond the 3rd of April, but beyond even that. So I think the way this works, what the government is doing is, when you want to do shortcuts to rule of law, it's a classical joke which might translate, how far is the village, old man? Well, about 3 kilometers as the crow flies, but I know a shorter way through the forest, if you get my meaning. That's the kind of practice that the Orban government is putting in place. So what I wish for all of us is that we need to have no fear, where no one is under pressure, where everyone can freely speak their mind, where they can be free and think free and work free. Thank you.
Köszönjük szépen. Nem tudom megállni, hogy
Thank you. I have to comment on just one sentence from Mrs. Yashadar. That mayor in Budapest is my boss. I'm his communications advisor. So the past 10 days have been a nightmare. I mean, he got like house warrants and house search warrants, and he couldn't even tell me what they were looking for. So we still don't know. We still don't know what the suspicion or how the suspicion is actually substantiated. So apologies for that extra sentence, but I felt it is my duty. Yeah, indeed, we are just turning our heads as much as we can. So now, questions. I don't know, we still have the questions. Yeah, I was hoping that you would still have that question. I had a feeling. Thank you. I will be brief, but this is a current matter, having spoken about law. The sword of Viktor Orban and his party, the metaphorical sword of their threats, is dangling above our heads. Even without speaking, there is still sort of like in the back of your minds, you have this scenario where EU would be taken out of the Hungary would be taken out of the EU. Do you agree with me? As far as I remember, Hungary ascended the EU through popular referendum, and the same was true for the NATO. So it was the people who decided that, and not a government. So what I'm not sure about is what legal options the EU would have, and I'm actually asking you, Madam Chairman, what options the EU would have to assert the situation whereby any country that ascended the EU through a popular referendum, they should only be able to exit through a popular referendum. So that's my question. Who can file such a motion? Who has to vote on it? What is the mechanism?
Well, we have an article in our treaties, how to leave, or Article 50, how to leave the European Union. Unfortunately, we have experienced it with the member state. I would like to use the opportunity to say we do not have an article that says that we can kick out a member state, because I hear that very often. If Viktor Orban continues like this, can the European Union say, we are going to exclude you from the European Union? We cannot. Now, as far as I know, and maybe the other lawyers here can correct me, the way how you apply for the exit of the European Union is a domestic question. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure that that is the case, because you have countries like my own where the possibilities of referendum are limited to very, very few legal questions. We practically cannot have referenda in Germany, which you can find odd, but the fathers and mothers of our constitution, after the historical past that my country has, found that even a vast majority of people can be very wrong. So it is just a question of democratic culture. So I'm going to check it again, but I'm pretty sure that the question how you leave is a domestic question. So I would find it perfectly logical what you are saying, that if you acceded to the European Union via referendum, that you can only leave it via a referendum, but it would not be a requirement that the European Union itself makes. It would be something that you would have to fight for and state domestically. I don't know if you agree. He does, so it has to be true.
Just very quickly, I'll do it in English this time, it's much better. I found the question very negative, and I tell you why. Because then you assume that we're going to wait, the Hungarians are going to wait what Viktor Orban will do if he stays in government. So I think if you know that these are the things that he is capable of, the Hungarian people have a choice in 1 month.
Jó napot kívánok, én Csúcs Zsombor vagyok, én a Demokratikus Lendületnél.
Hello, my name is Zsombor Csúcs. I am chairman of the youth organization of the Democratic Coalition, Democratic Impetus. We talked about education and pensions, and this is just reflecting on the previous session that we had. We didn't talk about accommodations and homes. And when we started looking at the key problems, that's what the one that we pinpointed to the top one. So my question is, what is the answer to the young people of Europe, the answer by the EU, by SD, by the political left, to young people who cannot, say, go to a university or college because they cannot finance their paying or co-own or sharing an apartment, or they don't have the chance or miss out on a chance to get accommodations in a dormitory. So who takes care of that? The question wasn't directed exactly to me, but I do feel addressed. The referendum motion that we launched is something that contains exactly this kind of symbolic matter. That is not about the Fudan University, rather is that the city leadership said that, okay, we understand that the Prime Minister thinks that Budapest is only good for organizing sports events, to build stadiums, but there are other things that are important who live here. One is the residential crisis. Our agreement was that there's going to be a student city built in the area where the government envisages a Chinese private university. And this would be accommodation for 8 to 10,000 students. Budapest, the municipal government of Budapest, actually filed a residential program to the Hungarian government. In Budapest, we have 24 municipal governments all in all, the central Budapest municipal plus the 23 districts. So we know that there is this kind of crisis. Whenever we say that we want stronger municipalities, it's not begging for money. Rather, it's something that we are trying, that is, we need to find good answers to the problems, the acute problems that we see. Indeed, residential crisis is among the top 3 here in Budapest, and so should the solution. Hello, my name is Mrs. Michon from the 11th district. Yes, I agree. It was quite a negative overtone in that question, but it is a true overtone. We are afraid that if Orban stays in power, he will lead this country out of the EU. It's just something that we really, really don't want. That's just what I wanted to say.
social benefit. There is no social welfare without democracy. So the democracy is the basis of everything. And we Hungarians are responsible to vote correctly during the next election so that we can have a democracy, and then the social benefits and the support from the European Union will come as it has came before. But we might, I would like to be positive. I am hoping, we must hope that we will vote correctly. At the same time, I would raise a question regarding the distribution of the EU budget. Would it be possible to create different mechanisms? Because I do understand that this regulation was not designed for such scenarios where the European governments are cheating and do not support the law and the democracy. But we have seen this, and perhaps also the law of the European Union shall consider this, to have some European institutes, so to have different mechanisms to distribute the EU budget, perhaps to the local administration, or I don't know, a kind of just an initial search, just the very initial thoughts whether the budget could be distributed in different way, because of course the government does not deserve it. Orbán Viktor does not deserve it, but we need it, because otherwise we will be even poorer, even less chance for us to fight for Europe and to fight for ourselves. So, this is the question, whether is there any opportunity of the distribution of the EU budget to the local administration or through different institutes of the European Union to make sure that they will serve really good purposes.
To be honest, I would like to answer that question with yes, but it's more complicated. You know, the treaties are treaties, and they are signed between European Union and countries, states. So the partner of European Union is always the national level. So normally the fundings are going via the national level. There are some smaller funds that go more directly into other areas, but the most important one go that way. There are some differences, for example, like in a country like Germany, which is a federal state. So the way goes from the national level directly to the different länder, and they decide how to distribute the money. To be honest, there is one area where we did fight to have at least a little bit of a say for local communities. But this is not for social funding, for housing, something. But what we saw in the last years, that a lot of work was done, also maybe in the current situation with the war in Ukraine, that most help was organized on the local level when it came to migration and asylum. And here we tried, but it was a long fight, because it's not really in the treaties, in the rules of the budget, that we should hold back a very small amount of money and try to find ways to give it directly to municipalities, to the local level. But if that works, it's not the best solution, because the best solution would be to have a more democratic government also in Hungary, clearly. But if this very, very short and small step works, of course, then we could evaluate and also find ways where is it that most of the work is done on local level in many areas, like in housing, where Europe has no responsibility on. And then we could try to change it to also have other areas to have a direct impact on local communities. But as I said, we are a little bit far away from that. So to that extent, we have to fight for different results on national level. But I will take it with me and also check that we can do at least this very first small step and then hopefully broaden it a little bit. But for the time being, of course, it remains a little bit difficult. Sorry. I would like to add something just to give a bit more optimism. Of course, it is all true what Birgit said, but you are probably referring to this new mechanism, to this new rule of law conditionality mechanism, as we call it, so that if you have a country, a member state that is systematically violating the rule of law, that funds can be kept away from that country. Now, we, especially we, and when Kati was still there, the three of us, but a lot of people aside of us, fought very hard for the point that the punished one should be the government and not the people. We were very well aware of the problem. We thought of and we discussed about a solution like you proposed it. We also had the same idea, but it is not really realistic and against the treaties. But we did introduce a different mechanism. We don't know yet if it works because it hasn't been applied yet, because we oblige the member state, even if we as European Union do not give the money, they have to give the money to the beneficiary. Because the chain is, as Birgit said, Europe gives the money to the national state, and the national state gives it to the beneficiary. So we put into this regulation that even if the European Union says you are not complying with the European Union values, so you're not going to get the money, the obligation of the member state to give it to the beneficiary, to the students with Erasmus, to companies, to the municipalities, it stays. So we hope that this will work, because we do not have very much pressure to underline this obligation. We only managed to introduce a mechanism that these people, the students, the companies, the municipalities, if it doesn't work, can report to the European Commission, and they will then put additional pressure on the member state that it works. Now, we don't know if this is going to work out, but we have seen it, and we hope that it won't get that far, because we hope that the pressure is on, and we really hope also that the Hungarian people see already now means are being kept away from Hungarian government, from the recovery fund. Gabi spoke about recovery fund means going into social affairs. Hungary is not receiving these means at the moment because the government is doing what it is doing. So we have to spread that message. If this government stays, if this government continues like that, then it will be bad for Hungary, so better change the government.
Köszönjük szépen az aktivitást, és
Thank you for the activity. One more question there. Hello everyone, my name is Ilona Ciriak. I'm very happy to meet many Hungarians from here, but I recently came back from the US, repatriated. I also very happy to see the many young people here, and I really liked the young gentleman speaking before and what he thinks should and will be the situation of young people in the future. Anyway, what I can see is that indeed housing is very expensive now in Hungary. One thing, while I was still living in the US, I've met a lot of young people who were leaving university, leaving college, and migrating to the US to make a better living. I met people who, for whom it all worked out. Some it wasn't so successful. And even when my family emigrated 35 years ago, we saw the same kind of situation. For some people, it worked out. For others, not. Telling you the truth, I am a US citizen at this time, and when I became a US citizen. I was the only one there out of 47 United States whose representatives there, and there were 10 federal judges tell us, welcome to the United States, and told me I was the only Hungarian there, asking me, where am I from? I said, from Hungary, I'm Hungarian. And, you know, it was really a nice feeling, and it's also nice to be able to represent, to be a kind of an ambassador for Hungary abroad. Hungary as a nation has a wealth of knowledge. People are very smart here. People are very nice to look at on the streets. I mean, when I came back, you know, I don't have a car. I like to travel on mass transit. I like to listen to people. I go to the marketplace and I meet like contemporaries, try to speak with them. And, you know, I have to go to the pharmacy. Again, something else that it's very, very expensive. I mean, you know, this was in the pharmacy a couple of days ago, and there was an old lady standing in the queue, and she couldn't pay for her medicine. And I asked her, how much would it cost? And she tells me, looking at me as if I were from Mars or something. And, you know, like, she stayed here and persevered, raised the next generation and so on. And she tells me, I am still waiting for my pension to arrive on the 12th, and then I'll be able to pay it. So, I mean, I was really very much moved. And I told the pharmacist, well, could you tell me just how much that costs? I mean, the 12th is like days and days away. And the pharmacist lady didn't know what I was asking that for. Was I from, like, you know, another planet? But ultimately, I paid for the medicine, and I also asked her whether she's hungry. And you know, I'm proud to be back in my country. I try to keep up with politics, watching TV, listening to whatever I can. You know, I'm not really fully in the picture, but just one thing. I'd really like for the Orbán government to get lost now.
And I would like to ask whether I have the impressions that my children in elementary school doesn't have the possibility to give my children normal English language teaching. Is there any program or project that is aiming to have a normal English teaching program in the future?
We don't have English lessons or any other German in Germany. We don't have it in Germany. There are countries that have it, but I know that many people think, hey, we have European Union, everything is now decided on European level. But unfortunately, I have to tell you that the education system is totally to 100% in the hands of national level. So it's the decision of member states to do so. And I know many countries who have it, even in the kindergarten, that children learn a second or even third language. They learn it in school. I have met a lot of people around Europe who are speaking English perfectly, or maybe another language. In Germany, we had long debates. Oh, is it overburdening the children? Shouldn't we really do that? But I think language learning for children is, if you do it in a good way, it's just like fun. They do it by the way. So if you want people to learn language, I fully agree with you. We should start that at a very early place, maybe even in kindergarten, by playing games, singing songs, doing things, and then continue in the elementary school. That's my favorite idea, and it must not always be English. If you live at the German-Polish border, why not have Polish lessons in German schools and have German lessons in Polish schools? Why not? So we can be very flexible on that, so I would appreciate that, but for the time being, we are not responsible on European level, but I would always be in favor of that idea.
I'll try Hungarian again, because you're speaking about English. Amit észreveszem a sok kérdés,
From what I'm hearing from many of these questions, and I really understand why these are being asked after 12 years of Orban. So you kind of seem to be hoping that whatever the government cannot provide, that will be provided by Brussels. Your question about housing, that's a very much national level question, and it's a problem true everywhere, but the solution is not going to be coming from Brussels. You have to solve it here. And I also understand how after 12 years you may feel that you cannot have changed this, but seriously, you have 30 days, 4 weeks left to spread the word. This is the only place where you can effect the change. All you can do from Brussels is help you, but you need to take the steps. Thank you. I'd like to ask Mr. Sándor for his closing remarks. Thank you, esteemed ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. Alas, it's natural that we have to start by speaking to the Ukrainian situation. This is a tragedy that we are sharing among all of us and sharing the pain of the Ukrainian people. So when I was thinking about what I need to say in my closing remarks, well, it wasn't easy. I actually wrote a speech. It had some professional parts that I essentially summed up, or was intended to sum up everything we talked about here. But as it happens, I took that printed piece of paper, and when I stepped off my flight from Brussels, I found a paper wastebasket and deposited there. And I'll tell you why. I saw a photo at the airport, and that changed everything. In this tragical situation, that photo is what gives me hope. Where I live, we organize food drives for those in need. I always put one package aside, because I know there's just one. Definitely is just that person who is ashamed to stand in line because they're ashamed of being poor, and it's that person whom I saw on that photo. He came out and stood in line not to get, but to give.
And so the lady who mentioned the other lady who had to decide whether to pay the bills or buy the medicine, so a similar guy took the last of his forints to spend and give them to refugees from the Ukraine. And I saw this picture and I said, and that's a teacher. So she is a teacher. This teacher raised and taught thousands of children and taught them respect and honesty and selflessness. And even when she's retired, she teaches me something. When selfishness tries to turn up the world, then we Democrats have a duty, a moral duty, that we have to help more than we can. And this basically poor teacher still teaches us. And she still teaches us that Europe and European values, what she used to teach, stems from us Hungarians, from European citizens. It stems from us. Europe grows from us, and the future of Europe stems from us. So our duty, moral duty, is to do our best and do the most we can for the future of Europe. Thank you for attending, and thank you for the presentations and questions. Please stay with us and have some food, grab some drinks, and listen to some music. Thank you.